Dear first-time homebuyer who did everything right, if I had to name the most frustrated person in America right now, not frustrated with life, just frustrated with real estate, it would be you. You didn't participate in the pandemic mania. You saved a down payment, you watched interest rates, you got pre-approved, and you waited for the right time to buy a home. And now you're sitting here in May of 2026, holding on to a job that you have mid feelings at best about, checking Zillow 3 times a day, and wondering why it's still not your moment. That's the cruelest kind of frustration, isn't it? Having done everything the way you were supposed to, having done it all right, and shit still not working out. If you follow this blog weekly, or my monthly podcast, Property Pursuits, you've probably been waiting for me to address the elephant in the room for a couple weeks now. Back in December, I published a blog, I followed it up with a big webinar in January, and I told you 2026 would be your last best entry point into buying a home. I told you the market was opening slowly and quietly, and that the buyers who showed up prepared while everyone else was still waiting would be the ones who won. I told you that cycles don't wait for confidence, they reward clarity. And then the United States went to war with Iran on February 28th. Everything has changed in the past 2 months, and I bet you're wondering, is she sorry she said that? I'm not going to defend myself today, but I will elaborate and let you decide where forgiveness is needed. You deserve more than a lender who just doubles down on her own call to protect her ego, so let me walk you through exactly what I think I got right, what I didn't see coming, and most importantly, what this all means for you right now, sitting at your kitchen table, trying to figure out your next best steps. Here's what I didn't know. I did not know about the war. I'm not going to pretend that a conflict that pushed oil from $71 a barrel to over $115 in a single week didn't change the math that I had laid out in January. It did. Rates that had briefly dipped down to 5.5% in February got pulled right back up. The confidence I predicted would slowly return for sellers, specifically the ones who were sitting on a bunch of equity in a home that no longer fit their needs. Their confidence took a hit that I wasn't expecting. And the slowly stabilizing market I described that was supposed to give first-time homebuyers the most beautiful combination of time and leverage, well, it got a jolt of uncertainty. That's real, and I'm fully admitting I didn't see it coming. Here's what I think I got right. In January, I told you this. Housing affordability isn't one when interest rates are at their lowest. It's one when competition is manageable and buyers have leverage. This week, NAR's own chief economist, Lawrence Yun, confirmed what I said. Here's what he explained. He said there are more than 6 million jobs in this country than there were in 2019. But home sales are down over 1 million from that same period. Read that again. I personally wasn't expecting the beginning of a sentence and sure as shit didn't think it would end the way it did. There are more jobs than there were in 2019, so more income, more people who can buy a home or who would qualify to, and 1 million fewer sales happening. That is so much bigger than interest rates. You know exactly what I'm going to say next, and you might roll your eyes. That is a confidence crisis. And it is creating exactly the conditions I told you about in January. A market where prepared buyers have leverage, where sellers are realistic, where listings sit long enough that you could negotiate, and where you're not competing with the emotional urgency that shows up later in the cycle. I called it a slowly opening market. The war made it a little slower. That's actually more of what I described, not less. Except, of course, the houses that are going in multiple offer situations on the weekend. There's no way to explain that except witchery. I'm just kidding, because I actually explained it exactly when I came up with the term confidence tax. That's what the sellers who aren't pricing and presenting their homes well are paying, a confidence tax. So let's get into this week's data. The April's jobs report dropped this morning and it blasted expectations. Can I just say how tired I am of saying that? The economy added 115,000 jobs in April, more than double the consensus that was forecasted of 55,000. That seems like a number that would send mortgage rates climbing. A strong jobs report typically means the Fed has less reason to cut their federal funds rate, so bond yields rise and mortgage rates follow. You know what's interesting about this morning? Mortgage bonds are just taking the jobs number in stride because there is a ceasefire in place between the US and Iran, mediated by Pakistan and currently extended, with active negotiations underway covering everything from the Strait of Hormuz to Iran's nuclear program. The market appears to be pricing in the possibility that a peace deal will actually happen. The market thinks if it does, oil prices come down, inflation pressures ease, and the rate picture changes fast. That is the whisper trade happening in the bond market right now, while everyone else is trying to figure out the jobs report. It is worth noting wages on that report came in softer than expected. Average hourly earnings rose just 0.2% for the month and 3.6% annually. They were expected to rise 0.3% and 3.8%. Softer wage growth means less inflationary pressure from the labor market side. So that, combined with a market that is quietly hopeful about Iran, today's strong jobs number is being absorbed without any rate spike. Hope is the only strategy here, though. We need to be real about that. This ceasefire has already been violated by both sides. The talks are very fragile. But for one Friday morning in May, the bond market is choosing cautious optimism over panic. They're choosing the story over the math. This is getting long, but there's actually still more data that I need to share with you. New home sales rose 7.4% in March, beating expectations. But before you pop champagne, the median new home price fell 6.2% to $387,400. What does that mean? Builders aren't selling because demand is surging. They're selling because they're cutting prices to move inventory. That's a very different story, and it tells you something important. Even the most powerful sellers in this country, builders, are negotiating with the reality we're all facing. Existing home sales fell to their lowest level in 9 months. Could that be the confidence tax? This is all macro data that may not translate to your micro market, but it is still worth noting. We got CPI numbers on Tuesday, and if inflation comes in hot, we will get CPI numbers this coming Tuesday. And if inflation comes in hot, rates could nudge higher. If it cools, we could see some stabilization. Sure, none of this data feels like a green light, but I will argue with anyone that we are not looking at a red light either. That window that I told you about back in December when I wrote something, I want to kind of go back to it because it was one of the most important things I've ever said. I told you the window wouldn't be obvious, that it was a quiet opportunity. Here's what quiet looks like right now. It looks like new home sales down 6.2% and nobody talking about it. It looks like Zillow cutting their price growth forecast over 3% and nobody talking about it. It looks like Powell saying that he's staying on the Fed Board of Governors so Trump can't appoint somebody new and nobody talking about it. That window I told you about, it's still ajar. Sure, it's not wide open, it's not perfectly lit, but it's open. And the buyers who understand that right now have a rare edge. The edge isn't necessarily less competition because the house they want might be one of the few that was priced and presented correctly. So they might be in a bidding war. But it's the ability to make a decision based on their own timeline instead of somebody else's panic. Because I've seen a lot of market cycles over 13 years, and the ones I think are hands down the worst are the ones where you don't have time to think. Here's the thing that will close this window. It's not a rate cut or hike from the Fed. It's not another bad inflation print. It's not even another geopolitical shock, as hard as that is to believe. The thing that will close this window is confidence returning to the market. When the headlines shift, when the war noise settles, when buyers who have been frozen for 6 months or more start moving again, that is when the window closes. Typically right about when Susie Orman airs a segment telling you it's a good time to buy real estate. It will close quickly, and you may not even hear it slam, but I told you this in January, and I'm telling you again in May, cycles don't wait for confidence. They reward clarity. There is, and I'll say this without a shred of doubt, pent-up demand waiting on the sidelines of the housing market for clarity. And when they get it, they're going to move. So what do you do with all this information? You find the listing that has been sitting, the one with a quiet price reduction, the seller who priced to a reality that was very real in February, but has since accepted that it is no longer the truth. That seller is motivated. That seller may negotiate on price, but they'll definitely negotiate in the terms of the contract. That seller exists in your market right now. You do not wait for the all clear signal, my friends, because when that comes, the game is already over.